Hello, and welcome to yet another live Findmypast webinar. It's me again, Alex Cox. I started out at FMP as a researcher, and I'm on the content team. And this week's webinar is a bit of a collaborative effort. I'm also joined by Estelle, Calfe, who works downstairs doing all the behind-the-scenes clever stuff, and our military expert, Paul Nixon, who has done a webinar for you not that long ago, actually. So this week's webinar is to celebrate our free weekend. So until Sunday, all of our BMD and census records are completely free, and it's also rather convenient because those are the record sets that you hint against as well. And so basically, this webinar is covering. We're going really back to basics. We're looking at the very first record sets you're going to encounter when you start off doing your family history, which are birth, marriage, death, census records. And also approaches you can take before you start researching, things like talking to relatives, how to store your research, and basically just good practice rules, really. So I'll just go to the next slide. So here's a quick breakdown of what we'll be covering. We'll be getting off with getting started, the very basics, the very first steps you'll take. Next, it'll be gathering information. So offline sources, where to start and how to, and then storing and organizing your research. Because trust me, you will be coming back to it. So having it all in one place where you can easily access it and find what you're looking for will really serve you in good stead as you get on. Next, I will be covering where to look and what you'll find. And as I mentioned earlier, that will be taking a look at the very first records you'll start using: Census Returns, GRO records, ordering certificates. And a few other additional sources. So I will now pass you over to Estelle, who will get things started.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Okay, we'll just go to the next slide. So, getting started. Now, family history can really be quite daunting. I started my own tree over 20 years ago now and just didn't have a clue where to start. And, you know, we've all got an interest in our family and our family history, but you're like, family history, genealogy, what do I do, where do I go? So we're going to cover some really basic sort of principles for research today. You know, you might ask yourself, what can family history websites offer? How do you use them? And again, sort of Alex is going to be talking about all that a little bit later on. So as I said years ago, over 20 years ago, I was just really keen to find out about my family and particularly about my grandma. And so I just started with a pen and paper, and I just drew a family tree about what I knew, and that was how I got started. So we'll go to the next slide. So first of all, ask yourself, what do I actually know? So start with yourself, and the most important thing I think that you can do is actually just write everything down. So start with yourself, start with your parents. What I actually did was I just had a notebook and I just drew a family tree. So I added in my parents and my grandparents and everything that I knew. If you can't go back too far, don't worry about it, because this is the whole point of family history, is that you'll start to find out more and more as you research. So when you start drawing your tree, add in everything. Add in if you know a date of birth or if you know the date of death. Even a year is fine. You know, sometimes you go, well, I think it was around 1907. I'm not quite sure. Just put down what you know or what you think you know. For women, it's always really important that you add them as their maiden name, so the name they were born with. That'll be key for when you start searching records prior to their marriages. And also, it's really important to add down locations if you know them. So where were your parents born? Where was your grandparents born? Where did they live? Do you know their occupations? All of these things all start to help build your family tree. And then think about the stories that you've been told. You know, were you ever told that you might be related to royalty? You know, look at Danny Dyer recently on Who Do You Think You Are? Turns out he's a direct descendant of royalty. You know, you might be able to prove that. Often you will find there can be an element of truth in these stories. I was very lucky when I started my family tree that my granddad was still alive. And one thing he told me was that his grandfather was a captain on tea clippers. And my own research went on to prove that my great-great-grandfather was actually a captain on ships. I've yet to prove the tea clipper part of the story, but I'm working on that one. So all of these facts, they're all going to help you as you start building your tree and doing your online research with records and so on. And if there's anything you don't know, it doesn't matter. Just put a question mark next to it. You can always come back and fill in those gaps later on. So, okay, so talking... yeah, sorry, poor Alex was on the wrong slide. That's my fault. So, talking to relatives. So this is also really important because you can't do this all by yourself. So get in touch with your relatives. If they live close by, just pop round and visit them. If they don't, pick up the phone, give them a call, email them, write to them, and tell them what you're doing. You know, and if you do go and visit someone, take copies of any of the documents you've got or the photos, because you know, if you've got some old photos and you don't know who people are, you might find that your relatives do, and they can give you some names and some dates and things. Show them everything that you've done so far. If you've started drawing your tree on paper, take that with you. If you've started building your tree online and you've got a laptop or a tablet, take that with you and show them what you've done. And then ask your relatives what they know. Hopefully they can help you to start filling in all of those gaps. And then you can add even more names to your family tree. And again, the key thing is write it all down so that you've always got something to refer back to. And, you know, when you're with your relatives, maybe they've got photos or certificates or letters, so take copies of them. If you've got a smartphone, you could take a photograph or take your camera. And just make sure you've got copies of everything. So, gathering information. So, it's family history, of course, it's not just about what you know. It's about gathering information from lots of different sources. Alex is going to be covering some of the online records later on. So for now, I'm just going to talk about covering physical resources. Okay, so asking questions. So it's really, really important that you ask the right questions when you're speaking to your relatives. So sort of, yeah, I've just sort of trying to cover here some of the basic questions that you could ask. So things like, ask them, you know, who their parents were, who their grandparents were, when were they born, where were they born, you know, again, write it all down. Ask them what they remember about their relatives. This is where you start to get the stories, and it's the stories that sort of start to bring your family tree to life. You know, if you know that maybe someone fought in the First World War, and you know that maybe someone committed suicide or something, you know, all of these stories, they all start to bring your family to life, and you start to build a picture of them and so on. One thing I would say, something that's quite useful, is that locations are really quite helpful. So, you know, say for example you're searching for a really common surname, let's say Smith for example. That's going to be really hard trying to find people, you know, if they've got a really common surname. But if you know that they are sort of from, say, a small village up in Lincolnshire, then that can really help you when you're trying to find them in records, because you're already starting to narrow down that search. So that's where things like locations and, you know, or even year of birth or as much information as you can have to hand sort of really, really helps. Okay, so family history resources. So, you know, there's a lot of things online, but again, let's have a look at what we've got offline. What have you actually got, you know? Have you inherited, you know, a big suitcase full of things? When my granddad passed away, I inherited his collection of photographs stored in my grandma's handbag, and that's been fantastic for me, you know, giving me lots of pictures of my family. to sort of I can then add into my tree. So have a look at what you've already got. You know, have you got some certificates? Have you got copies of your parents' certificates? Could they give them to you? Things like a birth certificate are really, really helpful because they'll give you the name of the mother and also the father if the father was named. If someone's got a marriage certificate, again, that's something that's really, really helpful because generally you'll get the names of the father of both the bride and the groom. There'll also be witnesses on that marriage certificate who may well be a relation. So, you know, all of these things can really, really help. If you've got photographs, have a look on the back. Maybe at some point in time someone's written names on the back of them. So again, these can all really help. All of these different resources, they're clues, and family history really is, it's a puzzle, and what you're trying to do is actually piece all of this puzzle together. So, so now we're going to just talk about piecing it all together. Once you've written down what you know, you've spoken to your relatives, you've gathered all your information from different sources, you'll probably be quite surprised by how much you've discovered. But the thing is, what do you actually do with it? You could keep it all on paper if you wanted to. A lot of people often will just store it in folders by family, for example. But there's also online solutions too. And really, this is where I think the fun starts with family history. It's when you're actually starting to piece it all together.
Sorry.
I've
got an errant slide.
Whoops, slides are in the wrong order. Not to worry. So building a tree is a really quick and easy way to sort of start gathering all your research together. The Findmypast tree is free to use. And what you do is you would start with adding yourself, and then you can add in your parents, and then everything else that you've discovered. So if you've got the dates of birth or their years of birth and death and so on, where they lived, add all of that in. You can also add extra facts to the tree, things like occupations, where they lived, any military service. You can also upload media. So you can see here, this is actually a picture of my tree where I've started to add in photographs of my family, and you can store photographs, documents, you can upload newspaper cuttings, letters and so on. Then you can start building a tree, and you can see we show some little orange circles, and this is these are called hints, and this is where we're hinting against some of our records. So this is starting to say, actually, you've added this person and we think we found them in our records. Now, Alex is going to discuss tree in a little bit more detail later on, so I won't say too much there. Okay, so now I'm going to send Alex back a slide.
Back a slide?
Because we have the slides in the wrong order. And, okay, so really my final piece of advice is revisit your research. It's really important to do that from time to time. Because you'll look at something, and say you're looking at a marriage certificate that your mum has given you, and it might not mean much to you. You might see a witness, and you'll be like, okay, yep, couple of names, great, okay. But then when you go back and you've done a bit more research and you look at that certificate again and you see that witness's name, you might go, oh, okay, so that person's got the same surname as the bride's sister, for example, who then married a Jones, or, you know, something like that. It will be, again, this is all the clues and starting to piece it all together. So it's really important just to go back in case, you know, something that made no sense before makes sense a second time. Also, things like that you might come across is an unusual middle name. You know, again, at first glance, you'd be like, okay, right, that's quite unusual. So, for example, my great-grandfather was Reginald Fawcett Rogerson, and I can remember my mum telling me this when I first started my family tree, and I was like, oh, okay, Fawcett, wow, that's a bit weird. And then, when I started doing my research, I found that Reginald Fawcett Rogerson, his mum's maiden name, was Fawcett, and that at that point I went, ah, okay, that makes sense. Okay. So That's why it's always really important. So yes, sorry,
Yeah,
Alex. Yours is a
mine
weird
is
one?
mine is Alwyn Rumsey. Yeah, that's ALWYNRUMSEY, and I've got quite far back, obviously, my family history, and it's on my father's side as far as we can see, but we are still none the wiser to where it came from. No idea.
Okay, well, hopefully, Alex, this webinar is going to give you a few clues as to how you can solve that mystery. Okay, so yes, so revisiting your research is really important. So we're going to jump our rogue slide and go to the next one. Sorry about this. Bit of a Blue Peter moment.
It is.
So we're on build a tree, and so now we need to go to slide number 12, Alex. Okay, right, so thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to pop off now and answer some questions, and I'm going to hand you over to Alex.
Thanks, Estelle. Yes, it's me again. I think I should probably actually set the scene as well. We are sharing the same microphone, so it's a bit like Lord of the Flies. We have to pass a conch when each of us wants to speak. So if there's any gaps in between, I am sorry. And also, I wanted to one thing I missed off at the start is one of the main reasons for this webinar is for us to take your questions. I'm sure you can all see that there's a Q&A box at the side of the screen. Obviously, we've got a team on hand at the moment who are trying their best to get through as many as they can. And also, depending on how we do for time, Paul and I will be discussing some of your questions live at the end. Estelle sadly has to leave because it's Parents' Evening, isn't it, Estelle? So Estelle is dashing off to Parents' Evening. So, right. So, yeah, I will be, as mentioned earlier, discussing the first records that you're likely to encounter on your journey. So, and I thought I would start off with 5 golden rules. Some of these may have already been covered by Estelle, actually, but I think these are always good to remember. If you try and stick to them as much as possible, you really will be making your life a lot easier. So number 1 would be note down the origin of every source you discover. And I mean, obviously that helps you find it when you want to revisit at a later stage, but it will also make it much easier for you to cross-reference your sources and make sure all your ducks are in a row, really. Number 2, take family stories with a pinch of salt and try to substantiate them with official records. I've learned from experience how true this could be. Before I started working at Findmypast, and before I'd even started looking into my family history, actually, my family's most famous ancestor was my mother's, I think, 5 times great-grandfather, Joseph Jessup. And Joseph Jessup was a cab driver from Rainhill in Liverpool. But the reason we all knew about Joseph was the family was adamant that he'd served in the Crimean War and survived the charge of the Light Brigade, and this had gone all the way down from through the generations. I remember my grandfather telling me about it with great pride. And then when I started working at Findmypast, I thought I'd check. So I dug out his British military service record, one of my favourite sets on Findmypast, and that they are fantastic multi-page documents which will tell you loads about your ancestor's career. And anyway, when I got to the page about where Joseph was posted and where he'd served, it turned out that he had served in the Crimea and he was in the Light Brigade, but he arrived there 2 weeks after the charge had actually taken place. So whether he got back to Liverpool and was telling tall tales down the pub, or whether this is something that just, you know, a case of Chinese whispers, it just got confused as it went down. But so yeah, remember that do take them with a pinch of salt, but more often than not, there will be at least a grain of truth in them. Number 3, cross-reference everything and try to find 2 pieces of supporting evidence for each connection you make. Sorry, I've just spotted on the slides that some of the letters have crossed over. I do apologise for that. Yeah, that's mainly so you can make sure that the evidence you've got is correct. I mean, obviously you will if your ancestor had a relatively common name, it's not unreasonable to expect that you'll find someone from the same region, born in the same year with exactly the same name. So by cross-referencing everything and finding 2 pieces of supporting evidence, it really helps you make sure that this person is your ancestor and the information you're noting down is correct. 4, expect transcription errors. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's vast amounts of data being transcribed in one go with every record set we add. Also, you've got to bear in mind that some of these records are very old and the condition of them isn't that great anyway. So yeah, do expect errors, and on original records too. I mean, I'll discuss that a little bit later, but you will find errors on images of the original documents. And number 5, organise your findings. Quite similar to number 1, I can guarantee that you will be revisiting things that you turn up during the course of your research. So just having it all nice and organised, will just make it a lot easier. So next, I will start with this for people who are completely new to Findmypast. I thought I'd just start with a very basic intro of how you actually search our records. So what you can see here is a lovely screenshot of our beautiful homepage. And there at the top of the page you see a quick search box. This allows you to put in some very basic information and search across all our records at once. Right, next slide. But what I would recommend, while it's good to start off broad, I'd recommend using searching by category. So if you click search here at the top of the page, it breaks down all our records into categories. We've got birth, marriage, death and parish, churches and religion, education and work, military, travel, migration, census, obviously, directories and social history, institutional organisations and newspapers. But you can also take that a step further by accessing our A to Z. You can see A to Z set of record sets there at the bottom of the drop-down menu. If you access that, it will take you here to a list of every single individual record individual record set that is available to search on Findmypast. You can search for them, and I'd say the real advantage of doing this is obviously always bear in mind that every record set we have has its own unique corresponding search page. So while broad searches are good because they allow you to search across multiple collections at once, these allow you to be a lot more accurate and targeted in your search. So for example, I'll show you just a bit of a comparison. Here is the overall census search for all our census records. You can search by name, year, house. I mean, it's fairly detailed. You can search by address as well. But if you compare it to the actual dedicated search page for the 1911 census, which using this page you will purely be searching within the 1911 census, you can see you've got a lot more options. You can search by marital status. I mean, simply putting in something like married and divorced can cut down your results massively if being presented with thousands and thousands of results. You can search by occupation, and also if you see the kind of little lozenge icon at the top of the search page, if you we're on person search, but you can also search by address. So you click that, and again, you can do a more targeted address search. So yeah, that's basically just to say that searching across broad categories is great if you really don't know where you're expecting to find your ancestor. But if you have a very clear idea, saying, well, I want a record from the 1911 census, sometimes it's better to use the individual search pages. So next, what have we got next? Next, so starting out with essential records. So the two essential data sets that I'll be focusing on will be at the heart of all your initial research, and these are the centralised birth, marriage and death indexes that date back to 1837, and, I hope I pronounced this right, decennial censuses from 1841 to 1911 in the UK. And all of these records are available to search on Findmypast. I tend to call them bread and butter record sets because they really will be the building blocks of when you start out. And these are great because they allow you to put people in the specific time, locate people in the specific time and place. And the information you gather from these records can then be used to add more colour, so you can go off for other resources and actually find out more about how they live their lives. So, starting off with GRO indexes. These are from the General Register Office, which was established in 1836 to maintain a central record of all the births, marriages and deaths in England and Wales. And this was a big step, I mean, particularly for us as genealogists, because it was the first time that such a vast quantity of personal data was routinely collected by a government. And today, as a result, these indexes really are the main building blocks of genealogy. In theory, all marriages from the 1st of July 1837 should have been registered within 6 weeks, but the registration of births wasn't actually made compulsory until 1875, so you can expect coverage to be a little bit patchy before then. If you're searching for an ancestor pre-1875 and you can't find them, it could just be that the parents decided not to bother. So, sorry, I'm just catching my place. Though original birth, marriage and death certificates aren't online, these indexes are, and they can be searched from 1837 up to 2007 in most cases, and the real benefit of this is that it makes it very easy for you to order hard copies of the original certificates, and as I will cover later, original certificates are packed full of information and can really help you skip back through the generations. The original index volumes of the indexes were arranged chronologically by quarter and year, then alphabetically and by surname. By surname, sorry. So when you're searching them, that's kind of the order they will come in. So coverage of these indexes is pretty good from 1837 up to around 1920. After that point, transcription of the indexes is a bit of a work in progress, really. There are occasional errors in the digital indexes, so if you can't find your ancestor using... Oh, sorry, my screensaver's come on. I'm just... Sorry, bear with me. There we go, back in the room. Right, I've slightly lost my place there, so I'm going to change slides. Right, next. So yes, and as this slide says as well, microfiche copies can still be consulted at the British Library, which is based near King's Cross, Pancras in London, and some regional libraries as well. Right, next. So, next step is ordering certificates. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the information that you will find in these indexes will allow you to log on to the government website and order them. I think it's £9.25 to order a certificate. But one thing you should bear in mind as well with the GROs is births registered from the September quarter of 1911 include the mother's maiden name, where prior to this they didn't. And marriage indexes cross-reference spouses' names from 1912 onwards. This does make it really easy because it allows you to search for two people at once, which again will massively narrow down your results. So here are a few tips for well, this is what the indexes themselves actually list. They, as you can see here, they don't contain tons of information. They list the name under which the event was registered. Again, expect to encounter misspellings or variations. The quarter and the year it was registered. So again, you won't find out exactly when your ancestor was born, just the year and roughly when. And also the district of registration and the volume and page number that your ancestor's name appeared on. All this is essential information for when you are sending off for the certificates, so make sure you make a note of it. Right. So now I will be taking a look at what the original certificates will actually reveal. They will reveal far more information than the indexes do, and the information they reveal will allow you to jump back through the generations. So birth certificates, as you can see here, they list where and when born, and you can actually gain a few little interesting clues from stuff like this. So if, for example, if you see two children on the same register with the same surname, the same parents born at the same time, you know, it could indicate that twins or perhaps even triplets were born. Second will be the name. This will just be the forename. A line, and also another clue you might find when looking at this is you might see a little line through this box rather than an actual name like John or Mary or something like that. And if you do see a little line, that means that the parents still hadn't actually chosen a name at the time of registration. Next, you will find the name and surname of the father, and again, you can also gather clues from this because the absence of a name here would usually mean that the baby in question was born illegitimate. Another thing to remember as well is before 1875, a woman could name any man as the father without actually needing evidence. So do bear that in mind when you are looking at illegitimacy. Is a constant curse to family historians. It makes things very, very tricky. So do bear that in mind when you're looking at the certificates. Next is the occupation of the father. Again, that's just really interesting because it will give you an idea of your ancestors' social standing, where they fitted into the class system, you know, also just kind of how they spent their day-to-day lives. And then after that, it will be a signature, description, and the resident of the informant. And this, in most cases, will be one of the parents, but in other cases, it could be a grandparent or a close relative. A certificate from the GRO will actually not show the signature. Right, next. And next is when registered. So from 1875 onwards, registration was required within 42 days of birth, and it was compulsory. It's this date that will determine which quarter of the births really appear in the indexes. And next is names entered after registration. If you have a certificate with a line through the names box, you should have a name entered here instead, because some people added or changed names at baptism, and this only includes names given up to 12 months after the initial registration. Right, next. Now we will be taking a look at marriage certificates. So actually, birth and marriage contain more information than death certificates do, but I'll cover that in the next slide. Birth and marriage are probably the most powerful in terms of taking your research further. So if you've got to pick, my preference, I'd say go with a marriage record, because obviously you also get the added bonus of having their spouse's information recorded as well. So on a marriage certificate, you'll have when they were married. Obviously, you will have the names and surname given by both the bride and groom. You'll also have the age. The age given by the bride and groom is only as accurate as they believed it to be or wanted it to be, really. So you will get cases of people gilding the lily slightly and saying they're slightly younger or perhaps slightly older than they actually were. The next is condition, and this refers to marital status, basically, whether they're a bachelor, spinster, widow, or widower. And again, usually no proof was asked for, so again, do take this with a pinch of salt. Next, rank or profession, and the good thing about here is it's common to not only find the groom's occupation, but occasionally you will even find where the bride worked. And after that, is residence again. So you will find some couples some couples weren't actually living together when they were married, so some would use a temporary address to qualify for marriage in a certain parish. So sometimes you will find parents' addresses listed as the residence, but in other cases it will be the marital home of the bride and groom. Then you will also find the father's name and profession. Again, no name here would also suggest that the child was born illegitimately. And next you will have the married in section. Basically that's just the location. That will normally be the local parish church, but you might also find non-conformist chapels or indication of a marriage by license. And number 9, witnesses. So this is the witness, those who witnessed the marriage. And again, this is really, really useful because they'll normally be close friends or family members. So not only will it give you an idea of who actually attended the wedding, but it'll also give you the names of your ancestors nearest and dearest. Sorry, I just need to change. Sorry about that, my screensaver came back on again. And finally, we will take a look at death certificates. As I mentioned earlier, these are probably the most basic of the 3 types of certificates, but all still very interesting. First, it will tell you where and when your ancestor died. This column should usually provide a date and location or a full address, but obviously people didn't always die at home, so you might find a death in a different registration district. Or if it was a work injury, sorry, I've got myself muddled then. Ignore that last section. Name and surname. Again, this was supplied by the informant, so this may reflect the name they used rather than the name they were actually given at birth. So, as I keep on saying, do take this with a pinch of salt. Third would be age. 4th, occupation. 5th, cause of death. If certified is used, that means that the cause of death was given by a doctor. So that's something to look out for as well. And finally, you will have signature and description and residence of the informant, just as you would have done on a baptism certificate. And finally, when registered. Registration would usually occur soon after death to allow for burial. Right, so that was kind of like a whistle-stop tour of certificates and Jaro records. Next, we will take a look at census returns. Census returns are an incredible resource, obviously, because they're taken every 10 years. They also don't just list your ancestor, they list who was in the household with him at the time. So if you're fortunate enough to have ancestors in, say, in an area where none of them moved away, or the children stayed in the family home till quite a late age, it should be relatively easy for you to literally jump back generation by generation. So, a bit of basic info about census returns. They were completed by each household on a specific night every 10 years from 1801 onwards. All UK census records have a 100-year closing ruling, which means that the most recent one you can currently search in its entirety is the 1911. Next will be obviously the 1921, and I think that's scheduled to be released in 2022, I believe. But returns from 1841 to 1911 have been scanned, transcribed, and are fully available to search in their entirety on Findmypast. So, quick rundown of what censuses can actually tell us. Obviously, they will tell us where our ancestors were living. They will tell us who they were living with, what their occupations were, which is always lovely to see, whether they had any servants. You'll find that more in earlier censuses. Who their neighbours were, if they had any siblings, their ages at the time the census was recorded, and with later censuses, you will also find whether they had any infirmities or disabilities. So, here's basically a quick rundown of key dates, because obviously the censuses changed over time. So, as mentioned earlier, the first census was taken on the 10th of March, 1801, and this was taken during the Napoleonic Wars. It was intended really to gather statistical information and to manage increasing demand for food, because of course there was a war on and these things were important. Censuses between 1801 and 1831 really were not that detailed, and sadly only fragments of the numerator's original notes survive. So, for example, on Findmypast we have fragments of the 1801 and 1821 Dartford census, but it literally is for Dartford and nowhere else. Where the 1841 census was the first census to systematically list the names of everyone in the entire country, and it's also the earliest nationwide collection that remains largely intact. And for the first time also, in 1841, census forms recorded the names of everybody at each address, including children, where they hadn't previously. Householders were asked to describe the occupations of people staying at their property, and this could include servants. You'll commonly see this noted in the professions column as M.S. or F.S, and that would normally mean male or female servant. So you might actually also find your ancestor residing with an employer rather than with their family if they were in service, as large amounts of people back then were. Ages were also listed in the 1841 census, but they tended to be rounded down to the nearest 5 years for people over the age of 15. A note was also made of whether or not each person was born in the county in which they resided, though precise places of birth weren't actually requested until the next census in 1851. From then onwards, censuses gradually became more detailed with every decade that passed, and marital statuses were also asked for in the 1851 census, as well as the relationship between each person. Oh, sorry, my screensaver has come on again. Here we go, back again. All right. So where was I? So as I said, 1851, from then onward, censuses became more and more detailed. Marital statuses were asked for, relationships to the head of household, and I will go to the next slide. Sorry, I've lost my place a bit. Sorry, from 1841 also, ages also became more accurate, and increasingly intrusive questions were also being asked from 1851 onwards. So the 1861 census was the first to ask if people were blind, deaf or dumb, and from 1871 even more intrusive questions were asked, and people were asked to be flagged as whether a lunatic, imbecile or idiot. Of course, those are very Victorian descriptions. Additional questions were also asked about employment status from 1891. So people would have to define whether they were self-employed, so that you might find them listed as on their own account, whether they were an employer or employed by someone else. And the 1891 census also requested householders to mention the number of rooms that were inhabited in the premises if the number was less than 5. So this brings me to the most recent census, the 1911 census, which is by far the most detailed of them all and will probably be your first port of call. On the 1911 census, you can also discover how long your ancestors had been married, how many children they had, and whether any had died. This can be used alongside marriage, birth, and death records to paint a really vivid picture of your Edwardian ancestors' lives. So yeah, do cross-reference. When you go back and check details you find in the census forms and the birth, marriage and death records, you might find that the date's slightly off, or you might find additional information that wasn't recorded. And also another interesting thing about the 1911 census is it was the first of all the censuses where householders were actually required to fill in their own forms. So you will see your ancestors' own handwriting rather than a transcribed copy from the enumerator's book. And you'll find you can find some quite funny examples in there. Like, for example, there was a chap called John Underwood who was a 47-year-old butcher from Hastings who had a bit of fun when it came to the infirmities column. And when he was asked to list his health conditions, he listed that he was bad-tempered. He said his wife was long-nosed and his 5 children were quarrelsome, greedy, vain, stubborn, and nosy. And yeah, you'll find quite a lot of notes like this jokily scribbled across quite a few census records, actually. And here is a prime example. One of the other really interesting things about the 1911 census is when it was taken, it was the height of the suffrage movement. So you will come across quite a lot of census forms like this, where you've got, as a form of protest, they've, rather than filling it in, they'll write no votes for women or no people here, only women. And I love coming across things like this because it really is a snapshot of the wider world at the time. And you also find some quite quaint ones as well. You find quite a lot of people listing their pets as members of the family as well. I mean, one I stumbled across recently, the youngest member of the household was a 3-year-old boy called Tom. I think his country of birth was Persia and his occupation was mouser. And in red ink and really angry capitals, the enumerator had scribbled underneath, "This is a cat." So you could see whoever was looking after the documents that day wasn't in a particularly good mood or didn't have a great sense of humour. But yeah, the 1911 census is full of weird and wonderful oddities, so yeah, get searching. And to conclude on my slightly muddled section on census records, I just thought I'd go through some really basic top tips. So number 1, less is more. So really, the less you enter in your initial search, the more results you'll get back. If you fill in lots of boxes and you get only one of them wrong, this could really skew your results. So if you're not 100% sure about the person you're looking for and you don't have all the details in front of you, do start broad and you can narrow it down as you go along. You can even search without a name. So you could search by location, you could search by gender, you could search by age, you could search by relationship to head of household, and place of birth as well, actually, which is very useful as well. Searching in a particular region will always narrow down your pool of results, so do bear that in mind. Next will be always allow for mistakes. So it's really advisable to, an example would be, it's rarely advisable to specify an exact age of birth because we recommend allowing 2 years margin either side when you're using census records. Even if an age is shown correctly on the census, the year of birth still can be incorrect, and you will often find that when you're cross-referencing against birth records. And this can be a very common cause of misunderstanding. Next, search for 2 people at once. So one of the great things about our dedicated census search pages is that you can search for your ancestor alongside other members of their household. This could be a wife, a child, a sibling, and yeah, by searching for 2 people at once, you're probably easily halving your results. You really are narrowing it down much, so that would always be recommended. I'd also say don't assume that every member of the household was actually home on the given night. As I mentioned earlier, census is purely recorded who was at the address at that precise point in time. And your ancestor may have had to travel in connection to work, or they could have been away for any number of reasons. So if they're not in the census, they're probably lodging somewhere else. And when you're searching them, use an approximate year of birth, because it's often quite amusing to follow one individual census through several years, because you will find, and this does tend to be the case with women more than men, that ages can fluctuate. Some women get younger as the census progresses, and some men too. So people, that's the thing about census. The information recorded is only as reliable as the person who supplied it. So do bear that in mind. And next would be establish bookends. So by that I mean identify a realistic time frame for which to search. So if you know your ancestor wasn't alive in 1851 and was dead by 1911, narrow down your results. Don't search across all the censuses at once. Simply look in the censuses where you know they will be. And finally, walk backwards through time. Slightly poetic way of saying it, I guess, but it's just to reiterate that as you have the whole family. So if you find an ancestor for your if you find a census record for your great grandfather, his father will also be in there. And if you find the record for his father as a child, you will also find his father, and so forth and so forth. So yeah, don't stop. When you find a successful census record, look for the next one. Just keep on going back. And when you get back to 1841, you may be lucky and find some in census fragments. But really, you're going to start needing to look at additional sources, which brings me on nicely to the next slide. So, real quick run through of additional sources, because we want to start answering some questions, actually. Parish Records. Once you've exhausted censuses and GROs, Parish Records will be your next port of call. Generally, they start in 1538, which was back when Henry VIII got rid of all the monasteries. The coverage kind of varies from site to site. We do have the largest collection of UK parish records, but it's kind of on a county-by-county basis. So some counties we have particularly good coverage for, like of Yorkshire, Staffordshire, Devon, places like that. So it's certainly worth having a look and seeing what's there. And parish records are probably closer to certificates than they would be to the GROs, in the sense that they tend to list the parents, they'll list the father's occupation and residence. And again, they can allow you to jump back through the generations with relative ease. Next would be newspapers. Findmypast is home to a huge collection of newspapers. They're great. They're packed with not just news stories. They're packed with they're also filled with family notices, so you might find notices of births, marriages and deaths, so don't forget to look for those. You might find notices for your advertisements for your ancestors' local business, but also they allow you to kind of view the great events, view history through a local lens, so how your ancestors' community experienced them, what people would have thought about them, and so forth and so forth. But they really are a fantastic resource, so do check them out. And finally, a very quick summary of military records. So as I have Paul in the room and he hasn't spoken yet, I'm going to have to pass him over. So here is Paul, our military expert.
Thanks, Alex. I've been sitting here for the last 40 minutes waiting for this slide. But anyway, Alex, thank you very much. I just want to say a little anecdotal story here, actually. I get asked all the time about finding photos of military ancestors, so I just want to give a few tips on finding photos. Because there isn't a single resource for finding photos, as far as I'm aware. So this is what I will do, and I'll finish off with a nice story. So number one, we'll certainly check Findmypast and online resources. Key the name of the ancestor in, see if a photo appears. Check newspapers. We've got millions of photos in newspapers, so you can check there. Regimental archives might be a source as well. So write to the regimental archive if you know the regiment your ancestor served with. And finally, which I think is what I've had success with, think about publishing your own blog or web page with information, looking for information about your ancestor. Now, I published a photo of one of my ancestors some years ago now on a blog. His name was Calfe. He was an officer with the Bedfordshire Regiment. He won the MC, and I was appealing for information about him. Coincidentally, this week, somebody contacted me to say they'd bought a photo on eBay, an unknown Bedfordshire Regiment officer wearing an MC ribbon. He then went on to Googled Bedfordshire Regiment MC, looked at the photo he'd just bought, saw my photo as well, and it was obviously the same man. So he contacted me to say, I've got this photo of your ancestor, would you like it? So there you go. That was fantastic news for me, because there's a photo I'd never seen before, another one for the family album, and just shows that my efforts some years ago to record the information paid off. So do consider that. If you can't find the photo, let the photo come to you. Put something up online. How are we doing for time, Alex?
We've got time for a few questions. Yeah.
Are we okay? Should we move on to questions now?
Overrun. Yeah. So have you got the Q&As up on those?
Yeah, I think so. We've been busily answering questions as we go on, but I'm sure we can find some others as well.
Oh, I've got a good one for you, Paul.
Go on then. Yep.
So here we've got one from, oh, actually I should also put, we were meant to be taking more questions. I did waffle on a little bit, so sorry for Paul's been sat here with itching to get started for the past 40 minutes. So here's a question from Roy Sprenger. Thanks very much. Roy has asked, any advice on shipping documents for those, for example, soldiers who travelled to Australia? I'm giving you a tricky one there.
Shipping documents. Travel to Australia.
So
I'm not sure.
That would be normal passenger list.
Yeah,
for military, would that?
Not for military. I mean, there would be troop ships. I mean, those lists for troop ships don't generally exist. You will find them coming from Australia. So there are embarkation rolls that we've published, very detailed rolls of soldiers coming from Australia, going to fight in different war zones, but not necessarily those going out to Australia. I've not seen anything anyway.
Oh, this is a good. I've got to ask you this one because Paul does also run his very fascinating military history blog. Georgina Spurgeon has asked, how do you set up a blog? And can you do this easily?
Yes, you can do it very easily. There are different companies that provide free software to launch blogs and to set blogs up. So just go to search engine like Google and type in free blog, how to set up a blog, etc., and you'll come across the leading sites, which are very simple to understand and work through, and very easy to set up and maintain. So yeah, just do that. Use a search engine to find out.
I'm just looking for another one. This question we will do. Let's take Les's. So this one is from Les Asquith. I haven't read it yet, so apologies in advance, Paul, if it's a very tricky one. Les has asked, my wife's great-grandfather and his two siblings were born in the 1870s. I can find them and their mother in later censuses, but cannot find the name of the father on any of the birth certificates or the great-grandfather's marriage certificate. Any advice to find the name of the father? I think that kind of goes back to the legitimacy thing earlier on, doesn't it? I mean, I'd imagine if it is completely absent, it would be that name wasn't known, and I mean, apart from that, I don't really know what your next step would be from that. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is tricky. We looked at this question earlier, Les, actually, and that's probably why it's still unanswered because we weren't sure what to say. I mean, you do find, of course, that there are brick walls when you think there shouldn't be brick walls. You think that the names must be there, but no, I don't know. I mean, try the normal things. Try the name variant searches and different spellings. Try record offices perhaps as well. Just keep coming back, checking with Findmypast as well. But that's all I can suggest, I'm afraid. Sorry, not very helpful.
And here's another question from Roy. I just spotted it actually because it's a very timely question. Roy said, what software would you recommend for setting up your family tree? And I'm going to be very biased and say ours. We have a fantastic family tree builder, and all, as Estelle mentioned earlier, all the record sets that we currently hint against, so that's automatic matches, which is our BMDs and our Census Records, are free this weekend. So if you are just starting out and you haven't done a tree before, I'd really recommend giving it a go, because hints do make things very easy, and you'd be surprised how quickly you will be jumping back. Right, so next question. Oh, this will be another one for you, Paul. It's another military. This one's from Gareth Rees. If a relative was born to a British soldier in Canada in 1843, where would the birth certificate be located?
Birth certificate. We've got data for British personnel military births overseas, so it could be there. But it could be with a GRO. If it was registered, it would be with a GRO still, the birth certificate. So try that. But we, as I say, we do have a British military births overseas section on Findmypast, so have a look there. Great,
and this one actually isn't so much a question, it's more of a prompt from Michael Stevens, who is completely right in mentioning that I haven't actually mentioned the 1939 register, which is also available on Findmypast. The reason I kind of skimmed over that was I was kind of trying to focus on the records that were free this weekend, but quite rightly, I really should have mentioned it because it is a massive, massive resource. So the 1939 register, for those who don't know, is basically it's a complete audit of the civilian population of England and Wales taken on the eve of the Second World War in September 1939. We only released, I think it's only just about a year old, but it's the reason it's so vital is because it covers a massive gap in records from that period. So the 1931 census was damaged really badly, and it is destroyed and no longer exists. A 1941 census wasn't taken because there was a war on. So what people will often find is if their recent family history can be harder than actually going back, because if they don't know the names of their great-grandparents, they're kind of stuck. Whereas the 1939 register is great for that because it plugs that massive gap, and it was also one of the most detailed record, pieces of government record taking that was ever undertaken, because obviously it was used for things like rationing and conscription. So you will find that it specifies the exact birth date, so it won't just say the year, it will say the day and month your ancestor was born. It will also be incredibly accurate in terms to their occupation, because obviously the government needed to know how many coal miners there were, or how many essential things for the war effort. They couldn't be sending them all off to the front lines. I think there's something like 9 million unique occupations listed. It's a really fantastic resource, and it offers a pretty rare snapshot of a vanishing Britain, really. So do check it out. And quick, yeah, sure. Just pop back over to Paul.
Just to add to what Alex is saying as well, the other thing to remember, of course, is that we're opening up more records all the time with 1939. So we published with millions of records, but we've opened up millions of records since then and continue to open them up. So of course, the reason so many records are redacted is because those people are still living or not proven to have died, and therefore we can't show those details. But once we have details that proves that individual is deceased, we can open the record up. So as the years go on, and as the hundreds, as we pass 100 years, so tomorrow will be 100 years, and we can open up those records which would otherwise be closed. So there's a continual process of opening up records. So keep checking. If you can't find somebody now, keep checking back.
Brilliant. So yeah, I think we've got time for one or two more. I think. I'm just having a skim through. Oh, this one looks good. How can I find naturalisation records within the US? Is there a Findmypast USA? There is. Yes, there is. Findmypast.com. So we have domains for Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, the US, and England, of course, and the UK, of course. Sorry, and Ireland, of course. So yeah, I can't forget Ireland. And all the same records are found across all the same sites, but obviously if you're based in the US, you want to register to findmypast.com. And yes, we do have naturalisation records. I think we added quite a large collection earlier this year, actually. The date range escapes me, but yes, they're definitely on there. I think some of them even include photographs as well. Is that maybe? Well, there's also passport applications. Either the naturalisations or the passport applications include photographs, and they're both great resources for finding immigrant ancestors. So if that's what you're after, they're waiting to be searched. So go check them out. And finally, Laura Smith. Laura has asked, my great-great-grandfather was married twice and had children from both marriages. However, in one of the censuses, another wife is listed while with a different child, but I could not find a marriage certificate for this pairing. Or birth certificate. Any tips? I think that kind of boils down to what we were saying earlier about them, the information only being as reliable as the person who was informing it. They were probably. Yeah, I'll pass it over.
I've got a very similar situation. My great grandfather was married twice, definitely married twice, and there were two marriages for him. But on the 1901 census, there's another woman living with him, and apparently his wife, but no. In fact, I wonder if we're related. Are we related? Whoever the questioner is. But it's the same. It's exactly the same story. But again, I can't find any evidence, and it could be that they weren't actually married. I mean, I've got people in my family who would ostensibly man and wife, but never actually did marry, and so that could be a possibility as well.
Lovely, and I think one more question, and this is from Edward Stewart, who said his Irish relatives left for America through Liverpool in 1848. Thousands of them did, yeah. I'm from Liverpool, so I think with the school I went to, about 70% of the kids there had Irish surnames. It was incredible. what is the best way to find any records of them? Would it be in England? Well, the reason I wanted to answer that question was one of the things I have not mentioned is our Irish collection, which is vast. It's huge. We've also got, I think it's over 10 million Irish Catholic parish registers as well. So, I mean, you've got a good, through Findmypast, you've got a good chance of finding them in Ireland and in America. Travel and migration records as well, you might find them crossing over as well. But yeah, just check out our Irish collections and see what you find. And yeah, best of luck as well. So I think as we are 1 minute past 5, we've overrun slightly. I should probably call to a close. So thank you very much everyone for listening. Apologies if I muddled a little bit earlier. I normally... Oh, thank you, Paul. And yeah, I hope you found it useful. As always, don't hesitate to kind of get in touch via Facebook or support at Findmypast to let that's the email address. Sorry, support at findmypast.co.uk to let us know any feedback you might have or if there's any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. And best of luck with all your future research. If you're just starting out, I hope you enjoy Findmypast. If you're not just starting out, I hope you're able to find even more than you've previously discovered. So yeah, thanks again, and we will see you again next time. Bye.